Now recording. So this is with respect to assignment 3?
Yes, I do have a question. So,
Okay. If you just give me a moment to pull up the assignment description,
of course.
that probably would be helpful. I hate how Chrome's got to pop up every time now, you know? It's like, I don't care, you're a web browser, just do your job. I'm not interested in your marketing copy. That's the thing I like about Linux, is it doesn't try to inform you or educate you. It assumes that you are both informed and educated.
Trying to get you to sign up.
Yeah, so that even more of what you do can be tracked. It's like Chrome and Google aren't tracking you enough. Your browser itself must track you with a login. Just watch. In 3 years, they'll require it to use Chrome. I bet you dollars to donuts. Anyway, assignments. Assignment 3. Okie dokie.
If you're putting it up there, it's not showing.
Oh, goodness me. Someone keeps setting it so that it's not mirror. I don't know why. Duplicate.
You're the only one.
I'm the only one who has it on duplicate? Really?
I just watched Dr. Raji that just left change it to that view.
Why? Then you have something different here than here. So how, if you read it,
I don't know.
how are you supposed to see? Okay. All right. Anyway. What is your question?
Okay. So assignment 3 has 2 essential functions. Number 1 is the input of the data from the user. So they're going to be putting in the first name, the last name, the health card, the date of birth.
Yeah.
This information, once it's in the form, is then transmitted to the server via a post request.
Yes.
Okay.
So far, I'm with you. Yeah.
Okay. So the second function of the assignment is to utilize the randomizer.
Yeah.
So the randomizer is on the server.
Mm-hmm.
When you hit the random button from your form, you're transmitting a message to the server via a GET request,
Okay.
and the server is responding with the data as a POST request. When it's coming back, it's a POST, is it not?
I didn't realize that server responses distinguished themselves as GET versus POST.
Okay, that's what I'm asking.
I don't.
If the data is on the server, and I'm saying, Dr. Moore, get me the random data.
Yes.
And then you say, okay, here it is. And it comes back to me, how is it being sent back? Is it distinguished between a GET or a POST, or is it just by AJAX that it's coming back?
So, my understanding of how this works, such as it is, I'm not a network specialist, right? But my understanding is, while the request packet has various types, the response packet doesn't.
Okay.
So a response is a response is a response. Whether you're responding to a POST request or a GET request or an update or a delete, how the response packet chooses to encode things will be the same.
Okay.
It will choose to respond to things in the payload. Like the difference between the POST request and the GET request is that the POST request sends the parameters via the payload rather than as URL encoded, question mark you know, with the ampersands, you know what I'm talking about, right? So it's, when it's being sent back from the server, it will always be in the payload.
So it's in a safe state coming back.
Yes,
And then when you're, just to clarify, when I'm requesting this, when I'm requesting from the server for the randomizer to send me the data, that request that I'm sending it as a GET request is actually correct. It doesn't have to be a POST request, because I'm just saying, Dr. Moore, send me the data. I'm not sending any data.
correct.
Perfect.
Let me just read through this to verify what, that's how this understands it. But yeah, the purpose of a POST request,
is when you're transmitting the data.
precisely, that's what POST means. You know, it's like with a GET request, you can send some data, right, using the GET parameters. But the purpose of the GET request is to get information from the server. The purpose of the POST request is to put information into the server's database in some way. That's what's understood by GET and POST. Particularly once you get into like REST APIs and that type of thing, which we'll be talking about a bit later in the course. The way that we introduce GET and POST in like the 559 program, which, you know, we have to do a kind of a slightly gentler introduction to it. We focus on like the mechanical differences between these two. We focus on information sent via URL versus information sent via payload, because there are security implications for those two different ways of sending things. But for the purposes of this assignment, again, I haven't quite read it yet, but it sounds to me like your ability to perform both a GET request and a POST request is being exercised by this assignment. You know, Dr. Brown is not understands very well how these technologies work and what is meant by these request types, so that's all sounds correct to me.
Perfect, okay. I just wanted to be reassured, Dr. Moore, because I wasn't sure, even though when you're accessing the randomizer, you're not sending any information. You're just telling the randomizer to do its thing and to send it back. So that would be a GET. It's not necessary to make them both functions POST.
No, like, it would work if you did,
It would.
right?
But there was-
However, okay. The arbitrator here is random.php itself, right? If random.php is looking for these things, they're looking for parameters in the GET request, you need to make a GET request. If it's looking for parameters in a POST request, you need to make a POST request. If it's looking for neither, it doesn't matter, but in principle, it should be a GET request.
Perfect, that makes sense.
So, just quickly tracing through this, it is not reading any parameters at all. So, it doesn't matter what, like, actually the method type doesn't matter at all. It could be receiving a delete message type. It would still perform the same function. Like, you have to understand like the header type or the message type as being just a piece of metadata which is attached to the packet, right? Telling the server, please treat this packet in this manner, right? Except now that we know some PHP, it's not so much, you know, we don't think of the server as just being like some entity that we don't have anything to do with anymore, right? It's like the PHP script itself is what determines how the packet is processed, right? So if parameters are expected via POST, that will appear in the PHP. If parameters are expected via GET, that appears in the PHP, right? The PHP is the server. previously when we said, oh, the server deals with this, the PHP script is the server that we've been talking about, right? So, yeah, because it's not taking any parameters here, literally any method, it's not distinguishing between request types. So any request type would produce the same behavior here. But, in principle, this would be a GET request. Does that make sense? Does that clear up the confusion?
That's great. And then one final sidebar.
Sure.
I read that the Biden administration has recommended that you no longer use C or C# programming languages due to security concerns going forward. I just wondered.
C or C#, so they're okay with C++.
Maybe it's all the C languages. They did mention those two specifically. That was a couple of days ago. Urges developers to dub C and C++. Sorry, it wasn't C#.
C and C++.
Yeah.
Let me see this. Okay, can you show me that? Yeah.
Memory safe programming. I just found it to be kind of weird that the White House would be recommending what people use.
White House Officer of National Cyber Defense is.
Memory safety vulnerabilities. I just found that interesting. Sorry.
Okay. So first of all,
I was confused as to what that meant, memory safe.
okay, so
And how that compares to some of the other languages that we use.
okay. My initial reaction, I can't say on camera.
Okay.
I will,
Sorry.
um,
You'll have to review that a bit.
Biden can go F himself, basically. And his entire administration can go F themselves. I'm sure they have their reasons for thinking it's within their purview to recommend programming languages to people, but it's not actually within their purview to tell people what programming languages they can use. There is nothing wrong with C and C++ asterisk if used by a skilled developer. I can actually explain to you what they're, like this is a sidebar obviously, but since you asked the question, I'm sure this is of interest to the rest of the class and perhaps of interest, I guess this is like a little bit of current events commentary for the YouTube channel or whatever, but
You're getting more likes?
yeah, actually, you know what, people really liked one of my recent Java lectures because what I did was I actually went through an array algorithm and I showed them how to make it efficient. Like, from an algorithmic standpoint, which is not usually territory I delve into because mostly I teach intro programming courses, but, so, let me explain what the problem is as briefly as I can, right? So, the C programming language has a thing called a pointer, right? You may have heard me mention pointers before. Pointers are an exceptionally critical programming concept, but they're also difficult to work with. Very briefly, what a pointer is. It's when the value of a variable is an address in memory rather than a direct value, right? So if I have some region in memory, at address 800, which I've called X, right? And I place a value of 10 in there. If I have a pointer to X at address 300, for example, the value of that pointer will be 800, right? So it just, we think of it as an arrow pointing at another piece of memory, but what it actually in fact is it's just the memory address of that cell in another memory cell. That's what a pointer is, right? To program in C, you must have a good understanding of pointers. Because, arrays, right? Arrays are implemented as just pointer arithmetic. So when you have an array, the first memory cell, like A is, if this is A and it's at address 1600, the array itself is just a pointer to the first element of the array, right? So basically, if you've stored values 5, 10, 15, 20, etc., right? When you say A at 0, what you're saying is access this chunk of memory at this address with offset 0, which gets you the first element. That's why we use 0 indexing for data structures instead of using 1 indexing, which most people would expect, right? It's like if you access A at 1, you are accessing this memory address with offset 1. 1 is multiplied by the bit width of the data type. So if it's int, it's multiplied by 4 plus 1600. This is address 1604. That's how you look up the memory. Like, this is how the computer works at a fundamental level in the deep sort of memory operations. This is how the CPU thinks about memory, right? So this is a problem. So there's a long-standing, very old problem in C where data structures don't know how big they are. When you create an array in C, this is literally all of the information that is contained in the array. There's no dot length, right? When you initialize an array in, basically any of the more modern programming languages, it's packaged with a certain amount of metadata. One of those pieces of data is how long is this array, right? But in C, you don't have that. So the question becomes, how do you know when you've reached the end of an array in C? And the answer is, you don't. In C, it's possible to perform pointer operations directly. A at 5 can also be written as A plus 5 dereferenced. So in C, if you have an array of size 100 and you access element, 101, what do you get? In any other programming language, you would get an array out of bounds exception, or an error of some kind. C doesn't have exceptions. What happens is, it will read the memory cell past the end of the array. It will actually just read this and return it for you, whatever that happens to be. Most of the time, this will be garbage, right? Because it's uninitialized memory. Most of the time, it's 0, but often it will be leftover memory that was used by some other program, right? In all cases, it's meaningless because memory outside of the context of the program in which it was initialized doesn't mean anything. You would have to read very large chunks of your RAM, and you'd have to scrutinize it yourself to see if there were any patterns in the data that would indicate what that data was being used previously for. it's volatile memory, it's just the way memory works, right? So, but that's a problem, that's like a noob trap. Back in the day, before operating systems placed more restrictions on these types of things, it was possible to read a much wider range of memory addresses. Like you could reach into kernel memory and read stuff and write stuff. Like this was a problem in the very early days of C. Basically, if you were bad at pointers and if you like tried like overwriting the first 100 cells in memory, which are all used by the operating system, right? You could do it and you'd crash it. You'd crash your computer with C very easily, right? We developed things, we moved on. Basically what happened as a result of that, the operating system had various protection features built in to protect against this problem becoming too much of a problem. Every program in an operating system is given a certain sandbox of memory that it is allowed to operate in. If it steps outside of its allowed memory, it causes what's called a segmentation fault, right? The segmentation fault protects the operating system from a C program that's trying to write memory that doesn't belong to it, right? So, are there still little tricks that you can use to write viruses to make use of like memory access violation and that sort of thing? Probably, but generally, in modern operating systems, this is not the same problem it was back in the 70s and the 80s, or even the 90s. You know, like.
Must be due to the president's age.
I mean, yes, that was actually a comment I was going to make about this article, is that they've decided to pick on a problem that C had like 40 years ago and like disrecommend its successor language, which by the way solves many of these problems. When you're working in C++, you don't actually work with arrays most of the time. You work with, they call them vectors in C++, and they're very similar to like the C# arrays and lists that we've worked with in class. They include that metadata, which makes it more useful to program, right? But here's the issue. Here's the issue, right? It doesn't get much more efficient than that in terms of memory, right? C is the most efficient programming language because it doesn't keep this kind of data. It trusts the developer to keep track of their own stuff, right? But if the developer is trustworthy, a C program will always outperform an equivalent program written in any other language. And the same is also true of assembly. It's like, you know, if the Biden administration is so concerned about memory leaks, why aren't they going after assembly language, right? Because as bad as things are in C, they're much worse in assembly languages. And here's another thing, right? So is the Biden administration going to redevelop every kernel for every operating system that's ever been written, which they've all been written in C, right? You know what it is? It's a bunch of bureaucrats who've probably never programmed a day in their lives, who are making a bunch of, you know, high-level recommendations and decisions about things that they don't know about because they don't understand how computer systems work, really. All they have is a bunch of buzzwords. It's like, oh, the concept, like, it's like, that sounds bad. We should recommend developers not use a language because we heard some bad words. Oh, this language has the bad words. Other languages have the good words. We gotta go with the languages that use the good words, not the languages that use the bad words. It's like, they don't understand what the hell they're talking about. It's ridiculous for them to suggest that developers should not use C and C++ because it doesn't hold your hand enough with respect to memory. Like, I would like them to just F off. Basically, that's a long way to say it, but they should just butt out. They should focus themselves on running America into the ground, which is what they're currently doing, and they should focus, they should stay to their wheelhouse, you know? Like, programming is already being sufficiently ruined by AI. It doesn't need their help, so, yeah.
Sorry to bring that one up, Dr. Moore, I thought you'd find that entertaining.
That's exactly what we need, is bureaucrats and politicians telling us what programming language to use. Oh, my sainted aunt. If I could find a big enough hole in the ground and dump them all into the hole and then cover it with a big rock, I would. That's what I would do. They should leave me alone. It's like, I feel personally attacked, you know? Because actually, C is one of my favorite languages. I personally believe that you don't understand how the computer really works unless you can program in C. C is as close as you get to directly programming the CPU. And basically, what they're saying when they're saying that is people can't be trusted to program computers. That's what they're saying. It's like, you're not trustworthy enough to program the damn machine that's in front of you. That's why you need, like, if you don't have the guardrails provided by all of these other languages, then, like, you're gonna get us hacked. And actually, it's kind of funny, because it's like, it's kind of an admission of
Fault.
It is. It's like, we're not good enough to beat Russians at this. That's what the admission is. It's like, you know, we're not good enough to beat the Chinese. The Chinese and the Russians are better programmers than us, so you guys need the guardrails. That's what it is, you know? I guarantee you that Putin is not saying the same thing to Russian programmers.
No.
Yeah. He's probably laughing his ass off, actually. Well, if he cares anything about programming, which, honestly, he probably doesn't, and that's probably fine, because what business does a politician have interfering with programming? What are you talking about?
SQL.
Yes. So, why don't we load up our example that we were working on last time and sort of play with it a bit further. I think that might be the best use of our time. So it also functions as good review as to how to set it up, because we'll have to reset up XAMPP. So, so let's grab our stuff, modules. Oh, I just realized I don't actually have to do this because XAMPP will probably already still have it. Yeah, okay. So let's get XAMPP up and running and VS Code over at it. Should use C++. What do they think everything's written in? Let me ask you a question. What do you think Python is written in?
they did mention Python specifically, that was a preferred language.
Of course they would say that. But the point I'm making, do you know what language Python is implemented in? Would you care to take a guess?
Probably C.
Yes. There are languages where the compiler is written in the language that it's compiling, and there are compilers written in C. Python is written in C.
Interesting.
Wow. Let's see here.
That is not it.
No, not at all. That's another class I was teaching in this room. Somehow it remembered it. It doesn't usually. So, XAMPP, htdocs. There we go. That'll be the one. I mean, if they want to do stuff like that, like make these types of pronouncements, all they're going to do is end up making themselves the enemies of the developer community. You know, like, just butt out. You know. I'm sorry. They need to check themselves before they wreck themselves. So. Let's start up Apache and MySQL. There we go. So let's recall how we go about setting up an SQL server. So if I may ask, just for context, what are you doing with the SQL in the other class that you are now currently taking SQL with? Like what are you learning?
Database. Building a database.
Okay.
How to manipulate the database.
Okay.
That's it.
Are you doing it like in terms of SQL commands?
Both.
Okay.
Using the interface and access and using commands.
Okay. My preference would be for you to focus on the commands, obviously, because that's what you integrate into PHP. In PHP, you don't get a GUI, right? But so you're not like talking anything about like networking it or anything like that. Okay. Well, that's fine. So you'll notice here. This is a thing about XAMPP on the school's computers. It kind of blows out the whatever database you have every time you log in. So if you're on your own computer, you can be reasonably sure your databases will stay intact between XAMPP sessions, but if you're working on a school computer, that won't be the case. So in any case, I will show you how to import and export SQL. In theory, this should allow you to move a database between Access and this guy. Okay? So, first we need a database. So let's take a look at what we wanted. We called it My Hospital. And yeah, let's recreate our database from last time. So, you click New. Database name is My Hospital. I think it was lowercase. There we go. Create. Remember that there's a distinction between a database and a table, right? They're different things. A database can contain many tables. Let's create a new table, call it medication. Go. Now, there's a couple of things that I wanted to show you that we didn't really get to last time. I just wanted to get things working on a basic basis. There are a couple of options that you can set for columns in an SQL database, some of which are very useful, aside from just the data type. The first is you can make certain fields required, right? So if you make a particular field required, it means that if an insert operation is performed and that data is not provided, the insert operation will fail and it will return an error to the user. In our cases, for medication, I would say the name of the medication should be always present in the entry, for example. So, we can say, what do we have? We have ID, name, stock, and is narcotic. So, name should be that's one of these. Am I missing a checkbox here?
Is it the null box, the null checkbox?
No, that, I believe that permits it to be null or, well, actually, oh, it seems like, yeah, okay,
The opposite, if it's not checked, then it is required?
yeah. Let's preview the SQL, and that should tell the tale. Yeah, okay, so depending on what vendor you're using, they have slightly different ways of implementing it. In the stuff that I normally use, it has like a required keyword. Here, not null is, so this is permitted to be null, these are not permitted to be null. So it's not actually the Boolean reverse. Anything which you are permitting to be null should be checked. So stock may be null and is narcotic may be null. So anything not checked is required. Does that make sense? Because when you fail to provide a piece of information, it inserts a null value, right? If you restrict these things from not being able to be null, that means that they must be required. Make sense? Make sense? Good. So, so that's an important one, because, you know, while it's nice to have the bare functionality working, and it's nice to be able to, you know, just do what you please, it is a fact of programming that the more you lock things down and control the way that things are accessed, the less likely you are to have people come along and violate access and do things they're not supposed to do and break things, right? You know, when I went on my epic rant about how this stupid article is stupid and these people are stupid for thinking that that was smart, I don't mean to disparage the idea of security, right? Security is very important, and like guardrails are also very useful, right? It's just ridiculous to think that you would denigrate an entire language, and it would be like saying Latin is stupid, you know? Like nobody really works in it directly anymore, but it's literally the basis for most European languages. It's like that's the level they're at, right? Good Lord. Yeah, that's the other thing. It's like, who uses C anymore? You know? It's so stupid. So, another thing, let's talk about identification numbers. So, in a database, probably even in your other database class, identification numbers are something that you have been putting in databases, right? No, not yet? Ah, well, they're extremely useful, all right? So, ID numbers for database entries, first of all, they don't take up much space. Second of all, they are always an absolute way of referencing any of the data in the database according to like one single entry. You'll notice that the way we access data inside of the database is using filters, right? Now you might say to yourself, oh well, you know, the name should be unique, right? You shouldn't have two medicines of the same name inside of the database. And it's like, yes, I suppose so. But think about other sorts of things, right? Think about people, right? First name, last name, right? If that's how you're identifying people as being unique, I assure you that even in the short time I've been here at this institution, I've seen several people with the same first and last name in my classes. In certain parts of the world, certain last names are extremely common, so, or at least it seems so. It's, you find you often have, 5 or 6 Patels per class, for example, and they'll often, every once in a while, 2 will have the same name, but they're not in the same class, that sort of thing. But the student database for the college has to deal with that, right? So, also, you don't really want to rely on string data for this type of thing. It's really much faster to use integer data because string comparisons just take a huge amount of time in comparison to integer comparisons. Just as a baseline, so for efficiency's sake, it's also useful to have a number. But you'll notice that every post-secondary student in the province of Ontario has a unique identification number, right? There's a reason, right? So, given that that's a known problem, and given that people are constantly entering and leaving the system, right? How do you make an identification number field such that you always have to make sure everybody has a unique ID, right? Because think about it from the perspective of an insert operation. What do you need to know that the ID you're inserting will be unique?
The previous IDs are?
Yeah, you need to know every single previous ID that exists in the database. This is obviously not cool, particularly from the perspective of this poor little PHP script. Generally speaking, if you're writing a PHP script that must load the entire database, you're doing it wrong, right? It takes a lot of time to load the whole database. Imagine if Twitter had to load the entirety of Twitter's database just to show you your view. It's ridiculous, right? So, what we have, number 1, primary key. A primary key forces a uniqueness constraint on a column in a database. So if I make ID primary key, this is a good first step. It means that anytime an ID which is not unique is attempted to be written into the database, if it's not unique, that insert operation fails. So that's one. However, you may be saying to yourself, why would I even bother? Why would I even bother selecting it? Shouldn't the database itself know what the next available ID number should be? And the answer is yes. That is the purpose of auto-incrementing. So that little AI checkbox, it's not artificial intelligence, it's auto-incrementing. So, if we make ID an auto-incrementing primary key, it requires an additional column for, like, it keeps a background column for metadata on this. I think you can just click through this and it just works. There we go. But we make ID a primary key, we make it auto-incrementing, and now when we insert data into the database, we never have to provide the ID ever again. We just leave it out, and the database software itself selects the next available ID number automatically.
Perfect.
Right? You don't have to worry about it. And if there's one thing we love, it's not having to worry about things. I particularly resent this story because, like, the American government is not even my government and I don't have any say. You know? It's like,
You can always send them a letter.
I have no status. I'm a Canadian. What do they got? It's like, oh, a Canadian. Canadian sent us a letter.
You
Jump
are,
in.
you are a doctor.
Well. Yeah. So there you go. ID now has a little key symbol by it, which is very cute. And we can modify our PHP script now so that we do not require, we didn't yet actually do an insert operation here. Okay, let's do that quickly then. So, now it's going to take more time than we have left in class, unfortunately, because we have to gather the data, unless we just like insert like a default entry, which we could do. So, let's prepare another statement. Insert into medications name stock is narcotic, values, name is default, that'll have to be single quotes. There we go. Name is default, stock is 0, is narcotic is false. We can then execute that statement. Statement, arrow, let me blow this up. There we go. Sorry. Statement, arrow, execute. Oops, there we go. You know I'm going to have that same rant in my Java class now too.
That's okay.
Oh man. Since it's not receiving any data, we don't have to provide any for the execute. But just say for the sake of interest, you know, we were reading this from a get parameter, right? You would have something like new name is filter input, input underscore post or get or whatever name, filter, sanitize special chars, right? That's our line which reads the name parameter from a post request, saves it to the variable new name. If we were to, I can do this on the back end, but I can't write a front end for this in 2 minutes, right? New name, new stock, and new narc. There we go. You would provide these in the order they appear, right? So the first one is name, so you provide new name. The The second one is stock, you provide new stock. The third one is narc, you provide new narc. Right? This executes the statement. Now, the statement receives a Boolean depending on whether, like, this operation will return a Boolean true or false depending on whether it succeeded or not. So, you know, success is equal to this if success echo it worked, else echo there were problems. Is this making sense? This is kind of the way that PHP likes to do things, is when an operation succeeds or fails, it tends to return a true or a false. This is because PHP is kind of an old school language and did not until recently have an exception handling system. So it doesn't throw exceptions when it gets bad inputs. It tends to return falses from operations, which means you can just kind of, in some sense it's a little easier to work with because, you know, you just write an if statement. Often PHP developers will actually take this and just put it in the if statement directly with an assignment statement, which I hate. Personally, I hate assignments inside of if statements. If statement guards, it's too easily confused with like equality comparison because it's 1 equals and 2 equals and 3 equals in this language. It's too many equal signs. Just separate it out. That's my opinion. But yeah, that's this code here, this block here, that will read anything from a post parameter that's been sent and then pass that on to the database. Does that make sense? Posting in the true sense, posting to a database. Any questions? Unfortunately, I'm kind of out of time.
Thanks, Dr. Moore.
If you have any questions about it, we're going to be, if you have any questions, please just send me that information, send me your questions by the usual channels. But let me just give you a flavor for upcoming events. Next week, we're going to be talking about MVC, Model Controller View Architecture, which is a very important, it's more of a top-level consideration. We're going to jump out of the sort of low-level details and do some higher-level details next week. But I do want to draw your attention to user authentication. If you're wondering, okay, databases are fine, but how would I go about like making a login system? We will be covering that in week 12. Does that make sense? We'll get, like, we'll flesh out some of these details as we go on. That's just kind of the nature of the course. It's very scattershot. But hopefully you know enough about PHP and SQL to be able to run the two of them together for the purposes of an assignment. Oh, one thing before we go. If you want to export an existing database, you click the Export tab. This will save the thing hospital, or just format go, there we go, call it hospital. I think it's saving the table, not the whole database, but that's okay. It saves an SQL file. If you open that with Notepad, you'll see what it has actually done is saved all of the SQL commands necessary to regenerate the table. So it's not directly saving the database itself, if that makes sense. It's saving the SQL commands that make it. But if you have such a file, which I imagine Access would be able to generate reasonably easily, you can import that with the Import tab, so long as it's, again, that SQL format SQL file. It probably failed because it's got nothing in it. This is the dialog, that's where you import data. For the purposes of assignment 4, there is a database .sql file that you will need to import, and that's how you do it. Sound good? All right, wonderful. I'll see you next week.
Thanks, Dr. Moore.
You're very welcome.
And is there a class over there? Maybe we can just go over there.
We've got an exam about in an hour.
Oh, good luck. What's the class?
Your favorite.
Oh.
Oh.